All right, greetings all, and I'm here with Richard Storey today. This is going to be a little bit of a break off from my usual routine here on YouTube, if you can call it a usual routine. I'm going to be introducing some conversations along the way with some people that I know, people that I find interesting. And fortunately, today I have a very, very interesting guest, Richard Storey. We have actually had conversations like this in the distant past, some 4 years ago, I think was our last, and it's been a while, so it's really good to be back on with you, Richard. And if you'd just like to say a word about yourself before we get started, then we can get into it.
Yeah, John, thanks for having me. A word about myself. So I'm an author. I used to be a libertarian, but then I became much more interested in, cultural arguments against libertarianism, the importance of, Latin Christendom, in establishing what we would now call Western civilization, and yeah, arguments against individualism and for corporatism, which is I think kind of what we're going to be talking about a bit today.
Tell us a little bit about individualism, Richard. Now, my understanding as I was growing up is that individualism was the cure to such diseases as communism and Nazism, and the only way of avoiding totalitarian dictatorships, and the liberal, like kind of classical liberal solution to the problem of dictatorial power. You seem to have a considerably different take.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all did, So I grew up in the sort of late 80s, 90s, and that was all everyone knew, especially in English-speaking countries. But obviously with America being the cultural powerhouse that it is worldwide, and with English being the lingua franca, um, this idea that what is right wing is actually more, the Margaret Thatcher, Reagan politics and economics specifically, versus what was seen as being like the collectivism of the USSR. And I suppose we still have that. When we're speaking about China, we think of collectivism as being the left wing thing, and we associate that with socialism. And what is considered right wing, especially in the Anglosphere, is individualism, as you rightly said. Classical liberalism, a flavour of libertarianism, perhaps. Um, and so what we're talking about there is, in economic terms, we're talking about capitalism. We're talking about um, borders being reduced just to sort of an economic purpose, really, and countries cooperating as much as possible. So we're talking about modern capitalism, and we're talking about where we are with that right now, especially since America primarily has had this hegemony. We call it liberal hegemony.
Interesting combination, isn't it? A liberal hegemony. It seems like there's something contradictory in that.
No, yeah, that's yeah, that's exactly right. Um, and I mean that is the contradiction. That is the contradiction in liberalism and in individualism. Liberalism is based on this idea that there are no public beliefs. There are no public creeds. But immediately, right there, I mean, you have your public creed. You have your public belief. Um, and so what that simply means is that then you're in favour of minority groups. You then start to pander to and even just invent as many different competing basically minority groups within your democracy as possible. And this does not lead to solidarity. What we would understand as a classical political value, certainly something that's still upheld. In the Catholic heritage of Europe, solidarity is just fundamental to any polity. Um, you can't have that. You can't have a proper sense of solidarity. And in fact, liberalism is designed to work against that. Something like solidarity is, considered, what R.R. Reno described as, the strong gods of old, and now we're in our liberal world order. The USSR collapsed, liberalism won. It was supposed to be the end of history.
It was supposed to be. Didn't work out.
Well, no, it didn't. Even Francis Fukuyama.
Or it's still where you even Fukuyama said no, but it's still working out, right? Or we're still in the process of coming to the end, I guess. But we're still in the end phase somehow. It's right. It's all done, but not done yet.
Yeah, it's like a really long end game.
Right, it's like the end of the third film of the Lord of the Rings, right? There's just another scene after the last scene, and then another scene after that, and you just
Yeah, we're just going to keep going. Yeah, it's like some sort of post-millennialism, or sorry, I couldn't get that word out properly. Where there's sort of an endless age of peace. But I mean, yeah, I mean, you understand what I'm driving at here. Liberalism cannot allow for anything that even whiffs of nationalism, anything that even whiffs of how things were before the old order.
But I mean, in doing that, doesn't it kind of set up a kind of alternative nationalism in a way? I mean, it's not really nationalism as we commonly understand it, but liberalism has this interesting ability to deny the things that it actually secretly adopts. I mean, one of the classic examples of this, I think, is the idea of truth. Liberalism in general tends toward relativism, the idea that there can't be a truth, because the moment you establish a truth, then it's very difficult to say that diversity, for example, is a real value, or that people should be allowed to do as they please. But in saying that there's no real truth, it's actually smuggling in the idea of real truth. And it does this just across the board in countless different ways. And I'm wondering if there's a way in which it's not doing the same thing here politically with nationalism, because we've definitely seen trends in recent years, particularly toward greater degrees of control, greater degrees of surveillance, greater degrees of, you know, closure of freedom of speech, oppression of individual rights, always toward the so-called greater good, always toward, minority rights or diversity, as you so rightly point out. That's kind of a central tenet of this whole thing. But I mean, there's that, like, this inner contradiction in which it's constantly pushing aside the very thing that it then pulls under the rug and brings in secretly into its kind of worldview.
What's actually occurring is that a system, which is no less authoritarian, is being established and is indeed inevitable. It's just that the system that's being established is one that primarily serves something which is not the people. It doesn't have a philanthropic, human-centered core or heart. That doesn't exist. It's not on the radar. If anything, the human is just an economic unit. The man becomes a tool within the system.
Neoliberalism is a great case of this, right? Neoliberalism is maybe the predominant example of this in our time. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. The way I frame it and I perceive it quite clearly to me is that when you have a system of individualism, and man has become so atomized in the society, um, this leaves a kind of a vacuum in terms of what system, what power is going to be there. And so just as people are serving basically technological progress, and ultimately, well, that ultimate technology of money, which is usually at the heart of things and is typically blamed for the collapse of every civilization, as people start to serve Mammon rather than God, more and more, what's happening is that a system is forming. It's just this system, its desire, its end really is the service of money. So something as soulless and non-existent really as money forms this great self-perpetuating system. It forms like a kind of, I almost want to say a living thing, but really this is forming like a beast. It's forming like a robotic beast, basically. Um,
it's like an artificial life, isn't it? It's like a kind of a simulacrum of life. It takes the place of life and seems to be alive, a little bit like our artificial intelligence, but it's really hollow in some fundamental way. And so this semblance becomes very insidious and very dangerous because it's so easy to take it as the real thing, when in fact it's actually offering a kind of poisoned substitute.
Yeah, and I mean it is poison, but it's a poison fruit really. It's very attractive to us because why? Because
Indeed.
money, it gives you this illusion that you can accomplish anything without without your fellow man, you know. Um, a
And without God, which I think is something you've focused on a lot in your work, right? This seems to be like a very, very basic dichotomy: Mammon versus Christ, or Mammon versus God.
you know, religion is really central to the formation of human civilizations. And I don't just say that flippantly. You know, but, you know, I'm saying it. I'm giving you a truncated version here, but there's a lot of research behind this, and really across the board, it is a religion of some kind, some shared values, some desire for collective sacrifice. So really, some kind of collectivism. Um, and it's that sacrifice. It's about giving. It's about giving of yourself. What money does is it preys on this desire to separate oneself from the group, and to so money really does constitute the individual. But this is an illusion. This is an illusion. You know, the libertarian ideas of, you know, Robinson Crusoe on his island and all of this stuff. It is a nonsense to the point that, you know, some you know, in other podcasts and things I've said I'm not even sure an individual really exists, because we grow up, we are necessarily enculturated, given a language, given the metaphors and the tools in our mind with which to navigate the world in any sense. Um, this doesn't come from in, you know, oneself. This is a collective activity, and it's necessary. You know, your brain will not develop. You will die if you do not have this. So the idea of this individual, um, really, this is a spirit of rebellion. It is, yes, it is coming from a culture. It is coming from something where, sorry, but your way of understanding the world is gifted to you.
Particularly if you're a libertarian or a liberal these days, incidentally, particularly if you're an individualist. I mean, that is very much a gift from our society.
Yeah, well, like I say, you know, poisoned fruit, but but you know, and you know, then again, you know, the religious symbolism or the spirit behind this is unavoidable. This is the rebellion of Satan. You know, this is Prometheus, you know, sticking it to Zeus. This is um, the individual saying, "No, I am separating myself from this. I will determine my own values. I will determine what is right and wrong for myself, and I will be the master of my own destiny." And you know that. Go on. Sorry.
So, no, so I mean, it occurs to me that given our upbringing and given it's very easy to fall into these very simplistic divisions of things between, again, say, liberalism and authoritarianism, or liberalism and collectivism. I think that's a little bit older, an older form of this at this point. I mean, back in the 50s in the United States, that was the defining discourse of the time. Things have kind of changed a little bit, but there's still that element. I mean, you still see this coming out, that somehow the only antidote to collectivism is focusing on the individual. And I think that the consequence of that is not only that we tend to uphold individualism without actually giving it an adequate amount of thought, but also that there's this very strong reaction that when you begin to see the problems with individualism, you fly immediately to what you've always perceived as the only viable alternative, which is collectivism. Now, I take it that you're not a Soviet-style communist, Richard. So, I mean, could you maybe try and identify some of the ways in which that basic division of things, that like binary division of things, is not quite adequate, and how exactly your idea of corporatism fits into all of
Well,
this.
yes. So um, to answer that, I completely agree with you that even when we're talking about things like left versus right in politics, um, so it's not really clear exactly what this is driving at. And for me, um, my I think the important division is the things that build up civilization and work towards the common good. And this is a human-centered thing, obviously. And on the other side, the things which tend towards this fracturing of that, and this increased individualism, or whatever dissolves then and leads to the decline and the collapse of civilization. That's the real dichotomy. That's the one that matters at the end of the day.
It occurs to me, in light of what we've been saying, that one of our real problems right now is that we're seeing a great decline that, however, parades as a great advance, right? It takes on all the guise of progress, it takes on all the guise and all the rhetoric of movement forward, advancement, development of new and unprecedented things. And so it's difficult to see the degree of our decadence and even the degree of our degeneration in light of the kind of masquerade that's been put on show before us. And part of this is because the very technologies that are being vaunted as progressive are the same that allow this kind of just massive society-wide illusion. How does that strike you? And it seems to me like this might be one of our fundamental problems, challenges right now.
Exactly, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And progress is one of those words that you mentioned before. Liberalism can take these words and it can completely co-opt them, but really it's a lie. It's not
Right.
doing anything of the sort. Progress is very much is central, because of course, um, as a Catholic, I can say I have an actual conception of the good to which I believe society should be ordered. Perhaps increasingly so. So I actually think society can progress towards something.
Strange view, Richard. Strange view. Right.
Yeah, well, today it is. I know, and that's how backward things are. Um, Progressivists today, they do not have any objective sense of the good. They're naturalists and materialists.
But I mean, again, here's another example, I think, of where they actually smuggle in an idea of the good, an idea of the good with a capital G. They just deny it constantly. But I mean, their entire worldview is premised on the idea that they can differentiate between good and bad societies. Individualistic, progressive, technological societies being good, and backward tribal societies or authoritarian societies being bad. And I mean, this appears everywhere in everything that they say, but of course they never acknowledge it. I mean, if you challenge them on it, many of them would back off immediately because they don't want to commit to any idea of the good as such. But I think that there is this kind of, I think that might even render it more dangerous because, when you've got this kind of an idea of how people should live, but you're not presenting it to the world as such, it's very easy for you to take that and to bludgeon people over the head with it in unexpected ways, right? It kind of appears in other parts of society where you're not expecting it, in terms of like the legalism and the bureaucracy that things are made, the idea of the protocol in the place of the law or something like this. And so you can kind of manipulate your idea of the good into other aspects of society.
Yes, it goes back to this public creed of liberalism, doesn't it? That there are no public creeds. It's making out that chaos is a system of order, um, and because yes, a system ends up forming around that, albeit one that is not orderly for humans. It's orderly for something else, for some other system. Um, that is it. Um, but I mean, the reason I see the dichotomy like that you have things that build up the civilization, things that destroy the civilization. Um, I mean, it's because another way of looking at it, and there are various thinkers who have tried to understand civilizational collapse in this way. Ivan Ilyich is maybe one of those, but you can also think of things in terms of man and technology, and so man has to um, be strong enough to have a grasp on his tools, to have the reins and really be in control of the horse. Um, Otherwise, the tools they'll run away on you, and this is what I think is happening in the West. This is how I think of our civilizational decline and all civilizational decline. Various thinkers have wanted to blame it on money. I view money as a tool. It is the ultimate tool, yes, but it's one of our tools, and we need to get a grip of it. We need to take the reins. We need to be on top of this, and we harness it.
But do you think that things like cryptocurrency might have a role in this, or do you think that this should be something rather that's a little bit less, again, libertarian, a little bit less wild westy? Because I do agree that the governance of money, and in fact the lack of governance of money in our time, or the way that it is governed, the way that it's manipulated and created out of nothing, and this numbers game that's being played on a society, on a high level in our society. I think that this is one of the great dangers that we're facing, just in terms of even immediate economic collapses and all kinds of problems that might come down to us sort of on a day-to-day level through the economy, but also in a much deeper and profounder way. Because I mean, as you point out, money really does have the power to grant illusions of grandeur, grant illusions of omnipotence, even if you have enough of it. I mean, I've heard some of the famous wealthy people who are going about these days, men like Andrew Tate and people like this, who have just an enormous amount of money and they're very, very proud of their wealth. Um, they tend to say things like, I can do anything I want, I can buy anything I want, there are no limits to my possibility. And that's got to act at some deep psychological level. I mean, there might be a way in which you even cease to believe in your own mortality in a certain sense, because there's always that possibility that you can use your money to buy your way out of it. And as soon as human mortality is off, then everything is open. Everything is becomes possible to a human being, morally speaking, right?
And we have been at that stage for a while. The wealthy, they are very interested in transhumanism. So they have reached such a spiritual state of individualism. They've become these Gnostics. Thinking that they can escape even the limitations of their own body. They are so averse to having any responsibilities foisted upon them, and to be so rid of the natural order, to be so rid of God, effectively, that they would be rid of their own body. And it becomes a sort of spiritual thing, because you have to wonder. They believe in basically a soul aside from the body, and they really do. The more you think about that, that's not a silly comment where I've not quite understood things. No, listen to what they say. Listen to what they say. This is really getting at what they want to believe.
And you used, I think, precisely the right word when you said Gnosticism. This is a spiritual way of approaching the world. Again, it's just a spiritual way of approaching the world that, in many cases, denies or hides its spirituality. Not always. We're seeing it appearing more, I think, obviously and almost even arrogantly. And I think we're probably going to be seeing more of this as time goes on, because I think that many of the old secular and atheistic conceptions that govern large parts of our society are no longer tenable, and that's becoming painfully evident to everybody. So I think we're going to begin to see more development of different forms of religion on a grand scale, and I think that's just the natural outcome and extension of the sorts of things that we're talking about here, and this kind of spiritual aspect to Mammon.
Right. And And I've said this to you before, John. I think when we were talking about what we might discuss, this is the genius of Christ to say, this is the dichotomy. You cannot serve both God and Mammon. Um, you are going to end up serving some spiritual power, something objective, something which is coming from a metaphysical kind of metalogical place. It's something transcendent to you. You're going to either be serving God, you're going to be serving your fellow man, or your people as well. So thinking about your society in a much more organic way, or you are going to be serving Satan. You're going to be serving the individualistic enemy of mankind. You're going to be serving Mammon. You're going to be manifesting a very different system, but it will have spiritual consequences on you nevertheless. Whether you want to, whatever you believe it will. And so that's why I am, always trying to draw attention to the fact that in the right wing, so the guys who are supposed to be about, the masculine values and the traditional values and all this stuff that builds up civilization, they've then got all these different kinds of individualistic philosophies and individualistic ideas, and honestly, I hate to name names and start attacking this person and this person, but I'm the guy that gets attacked. I want to have I want to have a conversation with a figure like Jason Reza Giorgiani or something and his Prometheism, and I want to say, hey, let's talk about this. And I tried to start a dialogue, and you get beaten with the anti-Catholic stick,
which in general is just, it's such a crude stick as well. I mean, if they were to come forth with some really interesting arguments in favor of atheism, because actually I think there are some very interesting arguments in favor of atheism, but it's always just the same tired story about how Christianity has been overcome historically, and we're past that now, and it's the religion of a race of desert sheep herders or something like that. I mean, just all of this complete frivolous nonsense that doesn't even bother to try to take the question seriously before ejecting it completely from the discourse.
The bee in my bonnet at the moment is Rollo Tomasi, who wrote The Rational Male. He's one of these, basically just like a pickup artist guy. But he's just so, these are real feelings I'm having. He's just so cringe, John. So the guy, he's one of these Gen X guys. He's this Gen X guy. He's an old man. He's old, and I don't want to be unfair. I'm not getting any younger, but he's got this bandana on, I don't know. He's like Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses or something, and he's posting all these pictures of him, this, suggestive satanic Pan, the goat, character, and it's Alice Cooper and Bill Hicks. This stuff is really, really old, and these arguments against Christianity are just so. It's just so beyond that. It just comes across as being boomer levels of being out of touch, and because it is, that's exactly what it is. I hope I don't get there one day. I'll try and at least keep myself up to date, with what's going on, what people are talking about. It's mega cringe. And this guy, he was the Andrew Tate before Andrew Tate, really.
I missed this whole thing somehow. I'm not necessarily unhappy that I did, but I'm actually I'm forming a mental image of this man as you speak, and it's quite an interesting image. But
but he has no arguments. He has no arguments really. It's just sleeping with lots of women. Oh, that's really masculine, because that is it. That is it. And then his argument against Christianity. Well,
Christianity doesn't want you to sleep with many women, so obviously it's wrong.
Yeah. So what does he do? this is not my word, okay? So, but he refers to Christians as moral fags, obviously, to just to have something derogatory to say. Um, uh, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is a guy who has no control over his libido. He's got no control over himself, and then he wants to use a word that is supposed to indicate that you don't have control over your sexual appetites to refer to the Christians. It doesn't even make any sense. It doesn't even make any sense. But he just needs a word to attack Christian morality. It's pathetic.
Obviously, that's just an attempted kind of vulgar shock value, and as you said, just kind of a will to be offensive and brash. But it does seem to me that, I mean, when you say that he's kind of at the mercy of his libido, I think that there's something very important going on there, because one of the things that, to my mind, absolutely and clearly differentiates Christianity from the old pagan religions is the fact that Christianity worships a God who is not embodied in any of the human passions, right? The gods of pagan antiquity were always connected in some way with some element of human desire, or some element of human lust, or ambition, or all of these different aspects, the warlike qualities of human beings. And I think that there's an important reality there. I mean, these are not just like biological processes; these are spiritual dynamics that occur within the human being. And when we speak of the ancient gods, we're actually talking about those spirits in kind of like a personified form, right? And the tendency nowadays to just take that as being like the old, like, ancient attempt to try to understand the world. They were not scientific, so they had to kind of invent gods to try to explain everything. That's just hopelessly inadequate. And again, it approaches paganism with the same kind of disquieting superficiality with which many people approach Christianity nowadays. You really have to get to a deeper layer here. And I think the deeper layer is that we're talking about spiritual realities that have active existence within human life. And if you do not have a way of standing against these, you do not have a way of indemnifying yourself to them and finding a way of living virtuously, then they will take command, they will take control of you, and you will become a different kind of human being. I mean, even in a certain way, you will be dehumanized. You won't be a human being in the full sense any longer, because you're being pulled into this kind of I mean, animalistic, but it's also something more than that, like a really like dark spiritual state of being in which you no longer can control your actions. You're being regulated by other entities.
Um, yeah, that's exactly right. And this is a pre-Christian understanding. This is Plato and Aristotle, where you understand that when we're talking about free will, what we really mean is that you are using those faculties which we do have, to more and more and more take control over your bodily appetites, so that you say when you do such a thing. It's not that your reason and your will is just hopelessly bowled over by your appetite, sexual or otherwise. And there's the illustration Plato gives of the charioteer with the two horses, being our bodily appetites and our spirit, and our emotions, and the rider, kind of being like our, you might say ego, you might say sort of executive control, whatever it is, like our soul, really. Um, that part of ourselves where we can say no to ourselves. Let's make it super simple so that anyone can understand this. Becoming a grown up, that's kind of when your parents aren't the ones saying no to you for a bad habit. You are the one breaking the bad habit. You're saying to yourself, no, no, no. Um, you know, I've given up sugar for Lent, or no, no, no. I've had one. I'm not going to have another one. Whatever it is.
No, no, no. I'm not going to sleep with every woman I come across. Just to throw out another example, right?
Absolutely. And guess what? You actually then start to cultivate different desires in you. Because you see what Catholicism is about, or I don't want to just limit it to Catholicism because this is something which anyone can come to understand. Um, you you have this ability to cultivate different desires in you, and you can order your desires towards something greater. It's not just, oh, I can't sleep with all of these women, oh, that's awful. You can then actually start to desire things that are of a higher order desires. Rollo Tomassi, he wants to write this book called The Rational Male. I said, well, how about you start loving? How about you start loving reason above these other things, really consistently? You can actually, yes, you can actually bring yourself to truly love the truth, to love itself, to love reason. You can bring yourself to love these things. And he
Philosophical attitude, isn't it? I mean, that's the attitude of the old philosophers. I mean, of the pre-Christian philosophers in particular.
Yeah, sure. But he then wants to say, well, philosophy is it's a cope. I'm sorry, but we're all reasoning and philosophizing all the time. Um, to greater or lesser degrees, but we're all doing it. We're all still thinking and reasoning. Try using language without it. If he wants to give up language, well, as you say, this doesn't just turn him into simply an animal. Given the faculties that we do have, if you start rejecting what it is to make you human, you become, a very dark creature indeed.
I think necessarily so, because I mean, you're rejecting the philosophical capacity in yourself, which means that you are rejecting the proper use of your reason in orientation toward the truth. And what happens then is that reason becomes a tool of something else. It always becomes a kind of end determined tool for some other part of yourself. Right? Coming back to Plato's chariot, right? One of the horses begins to govern the entire chariot, and you're no longer actually in control of the thing. Something else is in control, and it uses your reason to these other ends. I mean, this fellow that you're discussing, whose name I'm not even sure I've understood so far, but anyway, he's clearly using reason to try to argue. Yeah, right. But he's one of a kind, right? And that is one of a genera of human beings, not unique, right? Yeah, I mean,
He's an archetypal.
yeah, well, might be a little bit too dignified, but yeah. But I mean, he's using his reason to argue any number of different things, and I imagine he must be doing it at least somewhat effectively if he's obtained that kind of celebrity status that you're indicating he has. So he's obviously not a stupid individual. He's capable of making a logical chain of argumentation and deductions and all of this. But again, it's reason that has been put in the thraldom of some other part of his soul.
Yes. And I mean, he could be such a force for good. I said this to him. I said, you could encourage men in such remarkable ways, and you could come up with slogans and all sorts of different things to make really strong marriages and all sorts of. He could be a remarkable force for good, but having made himself a slave to his passions, um, he, it's what we were saying before, about either man has the tool in his hands, or man will become a tool for whatever it is, money, whatever it's going to be, some other system, some other thing, and he so, whether it's money or sex, these are tools, and they have to be a means to an end. Otherwise, they become a means in themselves, and we just become a tool for. Okay, but what is the end? What I suppose what I was driving at before. I was saying, as a Catholic, I don't see it that, oh no, I can't have sex with these hundreds of women or something like that. I see it that I really understand what sex is about. I know what it is, and it's rightly ordered in my life because, when you have your relationship with God fixed and right, that then reorders all the relationships you have with everything in your life, so that it is all rightly ordered and good, and then being kind of in harmony with, or um, um, you know having that light shining in you, you then start to become a light in the world. That's the metaphor there that's used, because that's really how it is. Once you're in harmony with God, and you love God, then you start to become this vehicle of that love in the world. And this is with all things. This is like material things. This is like the environment. This is your pets or animals that you're looking after, John. Yeah, yes. This is women. You look at a woman on the street, and you're not just thinking about how you might use her body the same way that this economic system we're in just thinks about how much it can milk out of you. You look at this, you're seeing a human being, yes, or it might be an attractive one, and you're thinking about her good. You're thinking about what's good for her. And I've tried to say to this guy, but I keep banging on about this guy. I told you I had a bee in my bonnet about him.
I can tell you're very passionate about this, Richard.
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit. The Italian genes are starting to come out. I'm throwing my hands all over the place here. It happens. I get a bit excited, and my hands are like a dog's tail or something. And I said to him, look, when you are encouraging men to be promiscuous, what you are doing is you are destroying like relationships with fathers, and you're hurting future husbands. And I said, you are doing irreparable damage to your people. He's such an individualist, he can't even really grasp what I'm saying. He can't even grasp what I'm saying. But this is a real thing. This is a living thing. I was talking about, money forms this system or whatever. People do. That's families. That's all the rest of it. And I've kind of wanted to bring it about to this because I realised I didn't answer one of your questions before, which was the big question you threw at me. How do we get control over money?
To be fair, you didn't answer that question because then I took it in a completely different direction without letting you answer it.
But it's an important question. It's an important question because it's not just about, okay, because we could be really individualistic about it, and we could say, Jordan Peterson, go and clean up your room. Oh, thanks. Well, my country's turned to. I was about to say a rude word there. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but you know what I mean. When it's all falling apart around you, and okay, but I've got my room clean, and when I go out and I can't really find a decent wife, and there are like no organic communities that I can be a part of, or I can have like a real identity. Okay, well, what exactly was the point in that? I get a better job. I mean, we're still stuck in the same system here. What's the point of this? So okay, how do we take control over money? It's something that's too big for an individual. You said, Richard, sorry, it's a big question, and yeah, I don't have the full, complete answer about it, but certainly, if we have groups, whether that's something as large as say like a nation, or whether it's as small as something like a business, and this is also rightly ordered, towards God, and this also has a philanthropic end, and this is also about creating families, creating happy, successful families. These things then start to take control over money in some capacity. And this is what the guilds were established to do. urbanization was skyrocketing. People were in Europe, um, you know, rushing into the cities. All kinds of new technologies and jobs were starting to come into existence. And as Catholics, people looked at this and said, okay, well, how are we going to avoid things like usury? How are we going to continue to be Catholics in a system like this? And so guilds, and the word guild, technically, in a roundabout way, it comes from the word gold. Um, these were created to answer that question, and they were created just by regular people, just by Catholic people, um, wanting to still live moral lives, wanting to still have their lives ordered towards God, wanting to still have an actual community. Having left, sort of multi-generational homes and sort of tribal communities from the countryside, let's say, coming into the city, they understood, well, we still need that. Um, and so those sorts of things were created to answer that. And, in a modern setting, we can point to typical examples. This is going to sound really tired, but you can point to someone like Henry Ford, and you can point to political projects, which were trying to, on a national scale, do the same thing and say, look, it's not enough just to leave it in private hands anymore, to try and take control of money. The Industrial Revolution has completely transformed the world. So taking control of our technologies, um, especially money, especially something like AI, and large language models, and the hacking capacities now that are opened up for something like that. Um, it's now become utterly urgent that we then have a political body which is then going to, yes, with force, take the reins of technology and order it towards the common good of the people. And this is why a country like China um, doesn't seem to be as worried about the development of something like AI, but because they have such a political infrastructure, if you like. They have such a political structure which is actually very corporatist, in place, that they're just better able to deal with something like that. Um, Liberalism, um, just it leaves all the individuals with all their different color hair and all their different identities that everyone has to have, so we all feel special and unique. We are a prey. We're a prey to new technologies, and it's increasing at such a rate that when, again, to bring it back to this, when I see guys on the right and they are espousing all kinds of individualist ideas, you think to yourselves, well, with friends like these, who needs enemies? And unfortunately, they're just really popular. So you can begin to feel a little bit like a voice crying in the wilderness.
Maybe that's just what we need to be, though, at this particular historical junction. I think there are needed more voices in the wilderness, and I mean, it occurs to me that much of what you're saying could be kind of categorized under a sort of grassroots approach. And then the other part of it seems to be like the implementation, though, of high level authority in order to solve these problems. And I think one of the great difficulties that we've seen play out rather disastrously in the past 100 years or so is that very often the grassroots is co opted by a kind of upper level movement, high level movement, which takes control of the body politic and enforces its will on the body politic, very often under the pretext of actually sustaining those grassroots movements, but in reality, in order to take control, to take power, and to kind of exert its will on the entirety of society. And I mean, I think that's the real problem with any kind of political movement in our time. It's always open to that kind of co-opting. Probably now more than ever, because there are now technologies that are capable of fabricating things as fundamental as video and audio, so that we can't even trust our eyes and our ears anymore. We can't ever be sure that a certain individual has done or has not done certain things, or has said or has not said certain things. And you know, that disconnect between the kind of authority figures that are at a high level in politics that we don't have any immediate contact with on the day to day, and then the the world that kind of surrounds us most immediately, in which it's very difficult even to see many of these actual problems in a very visible way sometimes, right? I mean, we hear about things that are happening that are very terrible in all kinds of different places in the world, both abroad and at home. But very often we don't actually experience these when we're living the world, I mean, living our lives day to day. So there's almost like a way in which much of the crisis has yet to arrive at our doorstep or something like this. And I think that's part of the reason why it might be difficult for people to react in a very vital way to some of these great changes that we're seeing. But I mean, it does occur to me that if there's no basis, like a foundation that's laid in people's hearts and souls, then any kind of political movement on the higher level is bound to end in disaster. That's the way that I've been conceiving of things lately. And this pushed me very close to Ludditism, but then I came back from that because I recognize that there are certain contradictions in that particular way of life that, in a way, it's just a continuation of the individualistic mindset. It's a continuation of the kind of, I'm going to break off and have my little anarchic reality, and I'm going to decide how everything works there, and I'm going to let society just kind of go to the dogs or sink, and I'm going to let that ship go, and it's not going to pull me down with it somehow because I'll have my farm, right? And that's not adequate. That's not an adequate reaction or response to the general crisis that's facing us. But I mean, I think that really so much of this comes down to the importance of community. So much comes down to the importance of the people that we live with, our family, our friends, and the people that we have interactions with day to day, and maybe our local governments, which we usually have a greater degree of control over if we're not living in some kind of a great city.
Yes, exactly right. And yeah, I often think about everything that you've just discussed there, John. Um, this debate that people have, in our communities, our circles, even between, oh, are we gonna go to the countryside and, like you say, stuff. I know Andrew Torber, who's the founder of Gab. He wants to establish all of these rural communities in the Appalachians in America. Um, or are we going to be in the city? I kind of lean, because I'm an urbanite, so I kind of lean a bit more towards. I mean, I'd love to come and visit your farm. I'd probably be a little bit useless. You'd have to tell me what to do and pretend to be impressed with things I do. Thanks, that's very kind. And hopefully I would be worth feeding me. And so I mean, I kind of think, oh, well, okay, what suits me would be to stay in the city. Or you say, is it, are we going to have grassroots movements? But they don't really work. So, we need a top-down system. Okay, but how are we going to do that? I think the important thing is that we need to develop communities, yes, and they can just be something like families. Not the easiest thing to do today, I understand that, but the other thing I think we need to do is to have our businesses. If you are in the countryside, if you're in a rural setting, and that suits you, and that's what great. Do it there and try and network as much as you possibly can. Do everything that you possibly can. I'm in the city, and I have projects I'm excited about, without going into too much detail, in the city to try and create um, um, groups which have a larger and larger political voice. These can be businesses, they could be charities. Do what you know and what you're good at, and try. Always have in your mind that you're trying to develop something bigger than yourself, and you are trying to develop a real corporate body, something that can actually have a voice and can represent a large group of people, because this is then how we start to have any clout or any say or any power whatsoever. It's not going to come from just the individual. And I respect you, one for actually having, your own homestead and building things for yourself, John, and really, really reconnecting with nature, not just like touching grass or this kind of stuff. You're becoming a part of your environment, and that's a really important way to get you out of yourself as well. And you know this is what we need to be doing. So the important thing with your mindset is to be thinking, I need to build something, and that something has to be group oriented, and it has to have a sense of identity. And like we said before, if you're building a civilization, if you're building a group, religion, to have some shared values, especially metaphysical values. This is going to be a part of it. It has to be, because religion is about sacrifice, and you want to make it attractive for people to sacrifice themselves for something greater than themselves, for the group. And so make it attractive. Be a part of your local traditional church, and celebrate the beauty, and invite people to that, get people involved, help that to grow, and do that in your life, do that in your home, and yeah, I suppose that's my solution. It sounds super vague. It sounds like I've just spouted a load of platitudes, but it's a change in mindset ultimately, away from the individualism. That's what needs to
And
change.
I think you're right on with this, Richard. And I think that the aspect of it which seems vague is simply the necessity of it being applied in a diversity of ways depending on individual circumstances. And I think this might be a way in which we can almost kind of like incorporate the lessons of individualism insofar as we take responsibility for our place in the world, who we are individually, our individual circumstances, both internally and externally, and we work from that. Now, this is where we break out of individualism, because we're extending ourselves towards something that's much bigger than ourselves. And without that, everything falls apart. We just collapse into the rubble of this kind of atomized existence that's more and more taking control of our societies. But I think that's an excellent place actually to close on, Richard. Unfortunately, I've got to go. I would have very much liked to prolong this conversation for some time to come, because I think that there's so much more that could be said about it. I mean, any of the points that we touched on could be the subject in and of itself of a several hour long conversation. So the only solution to that problem is that you've got to come back on and have another conversation with me one of these days.
Well, it would be my pleasure. What can I say? Yeah, always happy to speak with you, John. It's always a pleasure. Always happy to speak to you, because you always sound so smart, and sometimes it can, you want to have these conversations and you can't, uh, and then yeah, it's humbling, and it's good. So thank you for your time as well.
Your presence here as my first guest in this new segment of my YouTube channel is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for that, Richard. Thank you. Richard, in closing, is there anything that you would like to tell people about your work, anywhere that they might go? You have some very interesting videos on YouTube, for example, that discuss these problems. They go into considerably greater detail about various aspects of it, and I would highly recommend those. Anything else that you'd like to point people to, direct their attention to?
Well, you can find me on X. I'm not sure quite what to call it. Twitter X, just I call it X. You can find me on X if you just search Richard Storey, and you'll see some guy that looks a bit like me, with a pipe. Because I'm a Catholic online, so I have to have a pipe or a cigar, in my picture. So you can find me there. Also, the name of my YouTube channel, I wanted to go for something really catchy, so I chose Sacrum Imperium Romanum. Probably not going to be able to remember that, but if you type my name, if you type Richard Storey, you'll probably, again, see a guy that looks like this with a beard and maybe a pipe again. And yeah, so you'll find me there as well.
I will link to all of this in the description notes. That way, everyone can find it quite easily just by scrolling down. That's all you have to do: scroll down and click, which I think we're all accustomed to doing nowadays. So anyway, with that, Richard, we're going to close. Apologies for the various technical difficulties. This was a very Italian conversation because we both were gesticulating madly. I've fallen into the habit living in Italy, and I was intelligent enough to connect my microphone directly to my coat, my jacket. So every time I wanted to make a point, my hands began doing the Italian thing. Obviously, the microphone suffered, and so did you. So apologies for that, you, Richard, and to my audience. And also, at this point, the lighting also evidently needs some work. I presently look like a bad subject in a Caravaggio, but anyway, um, we'll get those straightened out in time to come. But Richard, once again, thank you very much. Thank you all for listening to this conversation. I hope it has been of value, and please, anyone who enjoyed it, like this video and share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below to tell us what you think about all of the things that we've been discussing here: Mammon versus God, and corporatism, and individualism, and all of this intriguing subject matter. And so, with that, farewell to you all, and until next time.